Hello and welcome to another episode of the Two and Under podcast. It's your resident happy clappers today. It's Jack and Dimi. We're going to have our work cut out today, I think, Dimi, to be happy, clappy and positive after the two games we've just witnessed. We are going to review the Everton and the Spurs games. And also we're going to have a look ahead to A.C Milan. Dimi, how are you doing?
Not too bad, mate. It's it is not great. Suffering 2 defeats in 3 or 4 days and conceding 7 goals is not good. But yeah, I mean, we are two more of the positive people on this podcast. I think we love saying the word perspective and entitlement. I think there's a lot of that going around. But look, we'll get into it tonight. But yeah, it's not all doom and gloom, and we are still in a good spot on the table despite everything we've endured so far.
Yeah. We'll get into it. It's a big contrast, isn't it, from last week, which was one of the best weeks that we can probably ever think of, really. And it could have been even better with the PSG events there. But it was such a good, positive week, and it's the life of a football fan. You go from that high to it's just a roller coaster. You go to the lows of a 7-1 cumulative away defeats. We haven't been used to talking about defeats, really. We don't lose many games these days, so people just don't seem to know how to react when we do lose games. It's like like a lot of people just completely lose their mind about it. And I think you talked about perspective there. This happens when you support sports teams. Your teams do actually lose, and Newcastle fans have got a lot of experience of losing back in the day, but it maybe wasn't as bad because we didn't expect to win. So if you don't go into it with high expectations, you can't be too disappointed. So it's a consequence of becoming good and getting better, I think. But how do you sort of react? How do you think about these two games that have come in short succession together?
It's hard to look at them without the entirety of what's happened in the last couple of weeks. So this morning's game was, I mean, I'm not using excuses, I'm just stating facts. It was our 5th game with the same outfield 11 in 14 days. Now, I'd hazard a guess that most teams, if not all teams in Europe, are not playing 5 games in 14 days with the same outfield players. So there's probably a level that we need to expect that there's going to be a drop-off, and obviously that has happened the last 2 games. The annoying thing for us is the way we play. It doesn't suit when we drop intensity and drop that sort of level of effort, so to speak. It doesn't really suit the way we play now under Eddie Howe. Maybe under previous regimes when we just sit deep and park the bus, maybe we could conserve some more energy and it won't be as effective. But the way we play now, we keep the ball. We like to press and be on the front foot. You can just see that the midfield and the whole team really just don't have it in them to press for any longer than maybe 4 or 5 minutes at a time. So it really, we're sort of playing with the hand behind our back at the moment, and it's frustrating in both those games because you would hope we would get, if not 3 points out of those 2 games, maybe a couple of draws, maybe we would have taken that. But both games showed that there were moments that we didn't take, and we did create chances in both games. Whether we deserve to get results, probably not in either game, but football games are about taking your chances and taking your moments. And even though you don't deserve it, if you take your chances, you're going to end up on the right side. So both games, I think we spurned some really, really good chances, and we'll probably get into it in a bit. But that's the overriding take is you got to look at these 2 results in the context of the 5th game now in 14 days, and just remember as well, the way we play is not conducive to backing up every 3 or 4 days with the same 10 players.
Yeah, and it's probably part of the learning that is going on at the club, that Eddie is learning. And I remember the club saying in that Amazon documentary, and me and you sat on the podcast after we qualified for the Champions League, that very podcast, and we said, there's going to be really hard spells next season. You've got all of these extra games. Not only is it extra games, it's extra high intensity games against top class teams. The cup draws have just been absolutely hilarious. Like it's been so hard. Like I think I worked out last week that after we've played Milan, something like 65% of our games this season will have been against European teams or English clubs that are in Europe or top, like top English clubs. So it's been relentless, and people will say it's excuses. What one man's excuse is another man's context. Really, you can't look at football and at results in isolation, because that's not how it works. You have to look at the whole context. But we kind of very rarely get well beaten. We don't get well beaten very often. It happened maybe once last season at Villa. It was the only time we really got hammered. It's happened a couple of times this season at Brighton. I think at Bournemouth we were well beaten, and in both of these games we were. I think that Everton score actually flattered them a little bit.
Yeah.
But what do you think has happened with these games? And do you think it is, like you said, just it's the culmination of everything that's going on that is meaning that we're going into these games, in trouble already? Or do you think there's something we should be doing or could be doing different tactically? But like you said, it's not that easy because we're not used to playing that way, and we don't necessarily have the players to play that way.
Yeah, I don't think we can really do much different from a tactical perspective, because the players that we have are trained and are ingrained in them to play a certain way. And most managers in the world have their style and want to play their style. There's not going to be many teams who are changing drastically the way they play week to week. And we've only got 3 or 4 days, or probably less than that, between games. So it's not like we can just come up with a new game plan every couple of days. So what's hurt us in these 2 games and why the score lines have blown out, in my opinion, is early in the games we've had moments, and when you don't take those moments and capitalize on those chances, not only you don't go ahead and you don't get that mental boost that you're ahead, but you also get a bit deflated that, oh, here's another chance missed, or there's another chance missed by Miggy, or there's a shot going wide, or whatever the case may be. And it sort of deflates you mentally and physically. You're already deflated, but mentally it hurts you as well. And we don't have, especially the last 2 games, we don't have 52,000 Geordies roaring and giving us that extra lift that we normally may have find that extra win. But away from home, it's the opposite, especially at Everton. It's a hostile atmosphere. They're desperate for victories. It's not as easy to rouse ourselves in the latter stages of the game. I mean, if you look at that game in isolation, their first goal was, I think, in the 77th or 78th minute. So for 75 odd minutes, the game's at 0-0. It probably didn't look like either team really was going to score up until that mistake by Trips. So it does seem that we are getting absolutely shattered in the last 10, 15 minutes, especially. And I mean, the Man United game, we looked shattered in that game too, but they're just so poor. It didn't really matter. The Chelsea game, they had 10 men, so we probably couldn't tell if we were shattered or not. PSG, they came into the game the last 15 minutes. That's probably when they had all their shots and chances, and we saw what Spurs did this morning. So it is frustrating, but I think that the fact that we're not being as clinical as probably we can be is just adding to the fact that we don't have options to change it up. And it's really everything sort of mixing into one big ball of problems at the moment.
Yeah, and there's a lot of intangibles in football, and one of them is the effect of the home crowd. You can't look at data or sort of analytics on the impact that has. And when the team is tired, or when you're feeling the pain in your legs, you can just imagine that the home crowd gives you that boost. They can drive you forward. And when you don't have that, like in a way, when we were in PSG, it was different because we were just we were just desperately sitting back, right? Because we were just so tired. We're playing such a good team, and we just didn't really have anything else to do. But in these games, the onus was on us a little bit to try and go forward as well. Like you can't really sit in and do that in these kind of games. I'm just going to put this out there. I think we've been absolutely screwed by injuries, and I know people will say that's just an excuse, and there are other reasons at play, but you can't have 12 or 13 players missing from a squad that got 4th last season, and that's playing all of these top teams in the Champions League. You can't have that many players missing and it not be a massive impact. So I think actually to have 6 points from these last 4 league games with all of the context, it's probably not too bad. 8 points would have been good, 2 draws, or even 9 points if we'd have beaten Everton or Spurs. And like you said, the fine margins, if we'd have got the first goal in either of those games, which we could easily have done, it would have been so very different. There's this kind of idea going around now that we're using it as an excuse, the injuries, but sometimes the simplest explanation is the right explanation. No team can legislate for this many injuries to that many key players and not be badly affected by it. Eddie actually referenced it this morning for the first time. I'll just flash up. He said that we weren't at our best physically, which is obvious. The lads were given everything, but with not enough resources to give more. I can't say it's all down to fatigue. We've got another game on Wednesday. I think that might be because he doesn't want to say it's down to fatigue. He's been trying really hard not to talk about this. He's made the good point. This is what we wanted this season. The Champions League is a very special tournament, but with it comes more games. We hope to be able to have the squad to cope with that, but with the injuries we've had, I think we've had it worse than any other team that I can remember. Like, these are just facts, really, that he's talking, but he's avoided talking this way up till now because he's been trying to take the focus off that in a way that not a lot of other managers would have done. They would have been complaining about this all along.
Oh, yeah, straight away. Yeah.
So he's been trying to not let the players use it as an excuse. But where's the line between an excuse and a reason and the context for what's going on? Do you think the players have been using this as an excuse, or do you think Eddie's done a good job of trying to deflect attention from this, but you just cannot get away from the fact that this has screwed us?
I think he's doing a good job of protecting them in his post-match press conference, because he's not digging them out and he's not sort of singling out players who may not be chasing back or may not be in the right position, because he knows what they've had to give in these 2 weeks since the international break. We've had, like we said, this is the 5th game in 14 days. This is not normal to have 5 games in 14 days with, I'm going to repeat it, with the same 10 outfield players with no options on the bench until this morning with Callum Wilson and Callum Wilson and Sean Longstaff. Let's be real. Matt Ritchie and Paul Dummett have been good servants, but they're probably not much more than championship players at this stage of their careers. And then you've got 18, 19-year-olds on the bench. But besides Lewis Hall, who's had some taste of first-team experience, but the other ones are absolutely nowhere near first-team ready. And if they were, they'd be playing. I mean, Eddie's shown if you're good enough, you'll play. Lewis Miley's 17. That kid started 5 games in 14 days. I'm sure that's not good for a 17-year-old to be playing 5 games in 14 days. His body development or physical development surely is not really ready to cope with that sort of level. So, I mean, it is a fine line between excuse and reason, but I can't see any other team being able to cope with 12, 13 players out of their first team squad and having to play virtually the same 11, 5 games in 14 days and come out of that with 3 positive results as we have. We've come out with 3 good results, 2 wins. You would have hoped to get something at Everton, but besides that, you can't really complain much more about the results that we've picked up. And everyone's saying, it's an excuse. I mean, I'd love to see how probably every other team in the league except for Manchester City, if you take out 12 players from their first team, I can probably virtually guarantee that every other manager will be using it as an excuse, number one, and number two, wouldn't be getting the results to the level that we have over this period where we've had literally no options off the bench.
Yeah, well, look at Spurs. They had a pretty bad run with injuries. And Ange said in his press conference that Newcastle are the only club that have had it worse than them. They'd lost 4 out of the last 5 and drawn 1. So they were badly affected by injuries as well. But our injured team would probably beat our team that's been playing, or would at least give it a good game, Maybe without Trippier and Bruno, that still at least give them a really good game and probably finish top half in the Premier League, which is quite a positive in a way, because it means that we've got these players to come back. We had Wilson and Longstaff on the bench, which was a big boost. There's been a bit of criticism or questioning whether Eddie could have mixed things up a bit. Maybe if he could have given someone a rest or played, like you said, Kraft, Dummett, Ritchie. That's really, really it. Like, there's Hall. There's nobody else who could have come in. I wondered if he might do that for this game, and in light of the fact we've got Milan coming up, and just for the boost it would give to see some of those players on the bench, able to come on, could have given us a big boost. But I've got to just admit, I'm still very much in the mindset of Eddie Howe has taken us from the relegation zone to the Champions League in less than 2 years. He's got all of the information about players' fitness, about the physical condition, about the teams we're playing, their strengths and weaknesses. Like I just trust him with my life. I really do. Like, so whenever and people may say, well, that's he still makes mistakes. Of course he does sometimes, and you still got to question him. It's healthy to have these debates. But do you think he could have used his bench more, or do you think would you like to have seen a bit of that, or do you just think he's doing what he thinks is best for each game to try and win each game?
Yeah, to be honest, I don't think he could have done anything else with the squad. I mean, unless people want us to visibly get worse in terms of the 11 that we're putting out, there's nothing else he can do. These 18-year-olds, like we said, Parkinson, Diallo, they're not ready for first team football, so that's a moot point. Matt Ritchie, I mean, he's been a good servant, but I mean, he can't be starting Premier League games, in my opinion, for us anymore. And it's one thing that you want to rotate the team and sort of freshen up some bodies, but I think Eddie, like you said, I think Eddie has earned our trust, and if he thinks that the best option is to play 10 players who are shattered and maybe only be able to give 60 minutes at 80%, and the rest of the game they'll be cooked. If he thinks that the best thing for us and we may be able to get a result, I'd back him in. Again, he'll point to the fact in that 60 minutes before we end up getting completely cooked, we created probably in the game against Everton and Spurs, we created enough moments, or we had enough moments that we could have either scored the first goal or definitely been in the game a lot more than we were with 20, 25 minutes to go. So yeah, there's nothing else, in my opinion, he could have done in this moment. And for those people who say, oh, Newcastle don't have the depth there, this just shows they don't have no depth. I think everyone's got to check themselves to see the injury list. And like you said, our injured 11 could virtually be a starting Premier League 11 who will do very decently in the Premier League. So yeah, I in my opinion, I don't think Eddie should have done or could have done much else.
I don't think there's a problem with the depth. There's a problem with the fact half of them are injured.
Yeah,
like you said, no club could really do put up with this level of injuries and not be affected. So I think we're doing pretty well, all things considered. Lewis Hall, there's a bit of talk around why he's not getting more game time. This exact same conversation happened after the Wolves game about Livramento as well. Where it was, why is Livramento not playing? I would just like to ask, who would Lewis Hall play instead of? Because Livermore has been so good on the left-hand side. Trippier, we'll talk about him in a minute. He's had a tough few games, but he's still probably one of our best players, and he's one of the world-class players we've got in the team. So I think, like with the team selection stuff, I think Eddie has shown what he does. He has earned our trust with what he does with introducing new players at a time when that he thinks is right. It's proven correct with Tino, who's been brilliant when he's come in. There's these things going around about how Hall's, they don't want to trigger his obligation to buy or whatever it is. So it's just like a bit based on absolutely nothing. But Hall's looked quite good against Man United when he played, but he's also played a couple of other games where he didn't look at it and he got subbed off at half time. And that's not to say he's not going to be a great player for us, because I'm sure he is. But I don't think he's been actually good enough, really, has he, to start games at the moment when you've got Trippier and Tino who can play?
Well, definitely not good enough to take Tino or Trips out of the team. So Tino's been unbelievable at left back. I think he's been that good that Burns going to struggle when he's fit to get back into the starting 11. But so for me, Lewis Hall, there hasn't been a position for him at fullback, and I don't think Eddie sees him as a midfielder at this stage. And he's only an 18-year-old kid, so I don't think Eddie wants to just throw him on into any position and say, just because you're a good footballer, go play in a different position. That's not what Eddie does. He wants to play people in the right position so they can show their strengths and show their best ability. Hall's got games this year. He's going to play probably against Fulham on the weekend because Trips is suspended. So Tina will go to the right, and Hall will most probably start. So he's going to get chances still going forward, even when the cavalry come back. But he's an 18-year-old kid. I don't think there's any problem for us not just throwing him into any position on the pitch just because he's there. Tino for me has been sensational, so you're not going to drop him, and Trips obviously speaks for himself. So yeah, the calls to get Hall in is more that he's shown that he can play to some extent, but obviously not in the positions that are available at the moment. So it's for him, he's just got to bide his time and wait for his opportunity.
Yeah, so I want to talk about the overall away form in a moment, compared with last season's away form as well. But before we do that, let's just talk about Trippier first, because he's had two really difficult games. I felt so sorry for him the other night when he made that mistake, and then he made another mistake. I don't know how much you can put that down to fatigue or mental fatigue, or whether he was just having a bad game, because it can happen to anybody. He's had two bad ones in the space of a couple of days, but before that, he got the assist against Man United. My reaction when he made that mistake was to go straight onto Twitter and say that how much I love him and how he's been the best signing that we've had under the new owners. He's been instrumental in everything good that's happened at this club. And I think as a fan base, we want to support him when he's having a hard time. It's easy to support players when they're doing well, and to say how amazing everything is. But I think we need to say how amazing he is when he's not having a good time as well. And we know that he's got the quality. He's going to be back. What have you made of his mistake-ridden performances over the last few games?
Yeah, it was tough to watch, especially that Everton game. Driving the car to work and watching those two mistakes, there were a few expletives thrown about and a few accusations about maybe his intentions. But no, look, Trips has earned, like Eddie Howe, he's earned our trust and respect. I mean, everyone's allowed to have a bad game or two, and it just shows for me those two, especially those two Everton mistakes. It just shows the mental fatigue. He sort of took his eye off the ball and lost concentration for that split second, and that happens when you're mentally fried. And the team have been putting so much energy into performing at their absolute maximum to get everything out of the games that we can with limited resources. And sometimes you're going to get these performances, or you're going to get players who might not be at the races, and that's been Trips. So I think it's probably going to be good for him to get a rest next weekend against Fulham, and won't be the worst thing that he's got that week ban. Obviously, we're going to miss him on the pitch, but I think he would use a rest because he's been playing virtually every game for us this season again. So it's hard to criticize Trips considering what he's done for us. Obviously, he's not openly going out there to make mistakes and cost us games, but it just shows for me that when players aren't fresh of mind, more so than even physically, these things can happen. And in that one of the goals this morning, when Son sort of skinned him and cut it back, it wasn't just Trips at fault; it was Lascelles as well. Who sort of lost his bearings of where he was, and he let that angle for the cross to come in instead of blocking the near post cross. He sort of left that space open because he lost the concentration because he hurt himself 30, 40 seconds earlier. So it's just a myriad of issues we're facing at the moment, where everyone has to be 100% focused and on it. Otherwise, everything else will take over in terms of mental fatigue. So in terms of Trips, yeah, it's one of those things that happens. I think he's going to have a big one on Wednesday against Milan, and he'll definitely want to prove, not there's going to be any doubters wrong, but prove that those two performances have just been an anomaly, and he'll be back to his world-class best on Wednesday.
He's so good as well, often that you forget he's 33, so he's getting on really. Like, not many players are still performing at that level at that age.
Yeah. And Son's world class, and he is probably one of the quickest players in the Premier League. So I don't think many fullbacks, when Son is on and he does that little step over and drag back, are going to be able to handle him. So there's no disgrace to getting skinned by Son. So this morning, I can probably forgive a little bit more than those mistakes on against Everton on Thursday. But yeah, they happen, and you're right. Trips is probably in need of a rest to just freshen himself up.
Yeah, and just the final one on these games before we move on to the away form in general. Like today, the defense was just ran ragged. Spurs were on it. They played really well.
Yeah.
Their fans have been saying that they've actually been playing quite well, even though they haven't been winning over the last 4 or 5 games. Our midfielders couldn't keep the ball. We were giving it away a lot. The pass percentage reflected that. It felt like the midfield was bypassed quite often. Lewis Miley's been very impressive in what he's done, but there are large parts of games that go past and you don't notice him there. And that's not necessarily saying he's not doing what he's supposed to be doing. And the same goes for Longstaff as well. That's his role in the team. But it just feels a bit like that when that happens, we kind of lose control of the midfield a bit. And if Bruno and Joe Linton are not at their best as well, there feels like big gaps all over the midfield, and the opposition can play through us, and they're creating all these chances, and it looks like we're just being carved apart. The attack's been isolated. I felt really sorry for Alexander Isak, who's been up there ploughing alone thorough on his own in these away games. Miggy and Gordon have been trying to support him. But it's a bit like at the start of the season when there was questions over the midfield balance, when we were lost to Man City and Liverpool and Brighton. So there's mitigating factors this time, but despite that, we've still, like you said, created chances. We've started both second halves really well. We were by far the better team at Everton in the second half until they scored. Really, Spurs, we were already 2-0 down, but if we could have nicked one there, they could have got a bit twitchy, and we should have been ahead at Spurs as well, even though they were creating chances all through the first half. We had a golden opportunity with Isak. Bruno had his shot.
Yeah.
And Miggy had his chance as well. So, what's your kind of takeaway from the games? You've talked a bit about this already, but we haven't actually been that bad, like despite the result, have we? In patches of the games, albeit we haven't hit the levels that we usually, that we need to hit in these kind of games.
Yeah, I think you've nailed it there. We're not at our level that we usually are, and Eddie Howe has mentioned that post game in both games. We're not at our level and playing to our full capability, but that's probably circumstances outside of control is the reason why we can't play to our full level for 90 minutes. I mean, Everton, we saw the first half we were a bit scratchy, but we lifted it after half time. But it's these small details that are costing us, I think, which start of the season, probably we had similar issues in terms of converting goals and small details, not taking chances. I mean, even that Brighton game, if you remember the 3-0 where they destroyed us, we had a couple of Isak had a couple of chances in the first, I think, 8 or 9 minutes. That he scores one of those. Who knows? Tonali as well. Who knows? That's a different game. And I mean, Liverpool, we had countless chances to put that game away. We didn't. Miggy should have scored, I think, probably both games. Everton and Tottenham, he had 2 really good chances that he sort of fluffed. And yeah, that Gordon one, I mean, I was up. I thought that was about to be in. And when the ball didn't go in, I'm thinking, what the hell's happened there? How did the ball not go in when he's cut that back? So it's these small details. It's not as if you're right. We're not rolling over and just getting completely walked over. But because we're not at our usual sort of intense selves and not imposing ourselves on the game, we're not able to create a multitude of these moments. And when they do come, we just got to take them. Otherwise, our midfield, like you're right, like you said, it just gets, unfortunately, completely run over, especially the way Spurs play. Their fullbacks push right up with this morning with Udogie and Porro. They were virtually playing a 2-4-4 or whatever they were playing. It was very hard for us to cover and track all those runs. So small details, like my mate Jose Mourinho says, football always comes down to small details, and both of these games we haven't taken them, and that just adds to the fact that we're not physically able to perform the way we want to perform. We want to press. I mean, Tottenham for me should be the perfect team that we play against because they play a high line. They're going to pass the ball around. There's probably chances to win the ball high up the park, and we just didn't have the energy to push them back. They were sort of able to walk through and play one pass through our midfield and they were away. So that's the frustrating thing, that we couldn't show our best selves.
Yeah, so let's have a look at the away form now, because I think this is quite a big worry. Like I don't get worried about things very often about Newcastle, because I'm just so happy with the whole overall situation. But there's absolutely no denying that our away form is a problem. We're 16th in the away form table after 8 games. We've won 1, drawn 2, and now we've lost 5. We only lost 3 away games in the whole of last season. Last season's away form, we were 3rd in the away form table. Here it is. We won 8, drew 8, and we only lost 3. So picked up 32 points away from home. The away form since, so I'm just going to read out the results and we'll have a little bit of a deeper dive into some of these away results that we've had. So since we beat Brentford in April in that 2-1 game where Wilson came on and changed the game, we've played 12, won 2, drawn 4, and lost 6 of the league away games. We lost 3-0 to Villa, which kind of was a very, very bad result last season, which we did recover well from. Then we beat Everton 4-1, and then we drew 2-2 with Leeds. We drew 1-1 with Chelsea, and that kind of dead rubber at the end of the season. We got beat by City 1-0 this season. Then we lost to Brighton 3-1. The Sheffield United 8-0 was a complete outlier, really. That was just a crazy game. Then there's the 2-2 against West Ham, the 2-2 against Wolves, and then there's these 3 consecutive away defeats now. Bournemouth 2-0, Everton 3-0, and Spurs 4-1. So it's a bit of a mixed bag because there's kind of, you can look at those games in isolation and you can say we should have maybe done better in some of them. But there's a definite pattern here, isn't there, of we're just not as good away from home. What do you think that's down to?
I think it's down to 2 things, and people might use this as an excuse, but I'm going to say that's a reason. One is we don't have, in a lot of these games, options to come off the bench anymore. A lot of the away games we've had have either been when we're completely shattered with injuries, in terms of, especially the Bournemouth one. I remember we had virtually no one on the bench. So that one was a complete write-off. Everton and Spurs, we've literally had no options off the bench except for 20 minutes of Wilson and Longstaff this morning. And for me, away games are different. You're going to have periods in games where your home team is going to be on top, and you need to be able to bring those game changes off the bench. And I remember how many times last year we could rotate Wilson and Isaac up front, and Wilson would either come on at halftime or he'd come on late and he'd score. I mean, that scoring run he had, I think, April or May last year, most of those goals he scored was off the bench. And he was coming on and making a massive impact. We just don't have a player to do that at the moment. And when you don't have that sort of quality off the bench and able to continue that intensity, I mean, people used to malign Jacob Murphy, but he was the perfect epitome of that, because he'd come on for 20, 30 minutes and his intensity would match what Miggy would do or what Gordon would do, or vice versa. And we just continually be 90 minutes at the fullbacks, whereas now we just don't have those options to perform. And the other difference between this year and last year is last year we didn't have Champions League football. So last year we had a whole week to plan for an away game, and we may be able to get our tactics right and save a bit of petrol in the legs, whereas now we're playing an intense Champions League game against world-class opposition and then backing it up a lot of the time with an away game in the Premier League, where Premier League games are intense at the best of times, except for that Sheffield United game. But most other Premier League games are intense, and it's going to be difficult. So it's for me, there's a lot of reasons for it, and some of them we could have done better, you're right. But I think just the busiest schedule that we've had and the fact that our squad's been completely decimated both has lent it to be such a poor record.
Yeah, and you can look at the West Ham and the Wolves games this season. We conceded late goals in both those games.
Yeah.
West Ham, we were by far the better team in the second half, and we were well worth that.
Should have gone 3-1 up too.
Lead, and we should have gone 3-1 up. So that was a key moment, I think. So that would have improved things a bit. And then Wolves, they probably were worth a draw in that game, but still, we'd still got into a position where we were ahead. Same with Leeds last season. We should have seen that out, and then they scored a late goal as well. So you can look at the games like that and say it's those moments, isn't it, where maybe it's a bit.
They're late goals too. They're late goals, like you said. I mean, West Ham was a late goal. Yeah. Wolves was a late goal. Everton, we've copped 3 goals in the last 15 minutes. So there is a bit of a pattern in terms of we just don't have the petrol in the last 20 minutes to go. Whether that's all the injuries, probably yes, and also the accumulation of games. It could be one of the key factors to why we're not performing.
Yeah, and whether it's a bit of sort of game management, street smarts at those times to just say, right, that's it, we're going to just defend now. But it's like you said before, it's hard to do that when your whole game is based around intensive pressing, and when you don't necessarily have the players who are capable or who are comfortable in sitting back and defending. We don't have a holding midfielder, which is another thing that has come up that I think, as we progress, like most successful clubs do have midfielders that sit. And I know Bruno does that for us and he brings so much. But maybe that's something we need to look at as well, whether we get like a physical defensive midfielder, whether it's maybe Calvin Phillips on loan for the rest of this season or whether they've got someone in mind for the summer. That'll be interesting to see if we do that to try and shore us up a little bit. But it's all a balance, isn't it? You can't take Bruno out of the team or move him out of his position because he's so instrumental in everything good that we do. So these are why Eddie gets paid the big bucks to come up with solutions to this, and that's why he will be given big bucks as well in the transfer market to go and sign who he wants to sign, really, or who the club think is going to help him and what he wants to do. Increase a bit of resilience, but it is just interesting how we were so resilient last season and how this season it's just not the same. Certainly on the road. The home form is phenomenal still, so that's what's going to keep us. That's what's going to keep us fighting up there, I think. Let's have a look at the league table. We are 7th. I don't know how Manchester United are above us. Everything that they go through, and they're still above us. This is a bit like what they were like last season as well. They kept on being above us. So we're sitting there 7th, equal points with Brighton. We're 4 points off Spurs in 5th. 5th is probably going to be good enough for Champions League this season. We're 8 points off Man City? No, 7 points off Man City in 4th. Villa keep winning. Do you think there's got to be a realignment now of expectations or ambition this season? Or do you think that 5th, 6th was kind of what we were looking at anyway? So as long as we can kind of keep in touch with those clubs above us, because we've got an easier run of games on paper coming up. Do you think that we just need to focus on taking each game at a time? What do you think? How far ahead are you looking?
Well, there's still a long way to go, even looking at that table. I mean, there's 22 games left in the season, so there's plenty of time to make up ground. I mean, you talk about Aston Villa; they've been fantastic. Their home form has been imperious. I think they've won every home game, or they've won like 14 or 15 home games in a row. But their away form has also been a bit scratchy. So it's not just us with the away form; it's them as well. But I think if we can keep in touch with Spurs, I think 5th is definitely on the cards. And I think we all said at the start of the season, if we finish in and around 4th, 5th, 6th, I think we all would have been very happy with that. And if you look at the teams around us, in terms of above and just below, I mean, I think everyone probably thinks we're well and truly better than Manchester United. Brighton have had an up and down season. They smashed us at the start of the season, but they've sort of been struggling of late. West Ham are a bit of an enigma. They get battered 5-0 against Fulham, and then they beat Spurs a couple of days ago. So who knows what's happening with them? And I don't think Fulham are a real challenge for the top 8. So we're right in that zone where we want to be. And yes, we're not challenging for top 2 or 3. I don't think anyone thought we were going to do that. And so as long as we can keep in and around that area, and like you said, there's a couple of games coming up that potentially could be winnable for us, and we can very quickly jump into that 4th, 5th conversation. And yeah, if we end up keeping around that spot, I think everyone will be absolutely delighted.
We're more than capable of putting a run together as well. Like before these 2 away games, our form was the best in the league over the last 10 games.
Exactly.
So we've done this before, and it's good that we've got a bit of a break from Europe as well. Even if we stay in Europe, some kind of European competition, that won't be back until February. January, we've got quite hard fixtures. We've got Liverpool, Man City, and Villa in January, but there is a break as well as the FA Cup game. So the next 3 league games are against Fulham, at home, Luton and Forest at home. So the Luton game's away. Fulham have just won 5-0 twice in a row. So that might not be as comfortable a fixture as what it was looking like. They do often give us a good game at St James's, but you'd like to think at home we'll give them a good game there. Luton have given some top teams a bit of a scare, but we really need to be going into that game and looking at winning. And then Forest, if we can get 7 to 9 points from that, we'll be right up again, up in the mix. And I think that's pretty much all you can ask for from the start to the season. That's the league. We don't have to talk about that for another week. Let's talk about the Champions League. AC Milan have got injury concerns of their own, actually. You probably know more about this than I do. They lost to Atlanta at the weekend, 3-2. They had 8 players missing from what I could see. But they have won 4 out of their 8 away league games this season. How do you think this is going to be a huge night at St James's Park? We all know that if we win, we will qualify if PSG don't beat Dortmund. If we draw, we'll finish third and we'll go into the Europa League. It's actually a playoff to get into the round of 16. If we lose, we're out completely. How are you feeling ahead of this game? Because it's going to be a massive night at St James's Park. I think this could be just what we need to get these 2 away games out of our system.
Well, I'm glad it's at home. I'm glad it's not another away game. I'm not sure how we'll be feeling if we're going to the San Siro trying to chase a victory on the last match day. So, look, I think it's come at a good time for us. A home game, a Champions League game where we feel we should have got the 3 points against PSG the other week. So there'll be a bit of fire in the crowd, which I think we need. And with Wilson and Longstaff coming back yesterday, that's a positive sign that they're at least able to give half an hour or so of game time on Wednesday night. So I think it's a very winnable game because Milan, they threw everything at that last Champions League game and they got beat by Dortmund at home, and they probably can't qualify unless everything goes their way. I don't think they can qualify for the Champions League. So for the next round of the Champions League, so they're going to come a little bit on a downer to St James's Park, and as long as Giroud, who seems to score every time when he plays for any team against us, as long as he doesn't bring his shooting boots, I think we can get right at him. And if we do score first against them, they may just pack up shop and sort of not worried about it. So I think it's a massive opportunity for us, and I think the team is going to be grateful it's going to be at St James's Park because the atmosphere will be heaving, and it's definitely not a game we should fear because Milan, even though they gave a good game of us on the first match day, and they probably deserved, arguably, to get the 3 points, they're coming here wounded as well, and they're coming here bottom of the table. So we should feel confident about that, and we should feel that if we bring who knows how much intensity we can bring, but if we bring somewhat close to our top intensity for an hour or so, we may be able to blow them out of the water, and they may just roll over and not sort of bother chasing the game at the end if they're done.
I think Leao was injured the other day. He was the real danger man. So I don't know is he actually injured for this game as well, because that's going to be.
He's in doubt. I'm not sure he's confirmed out, but he's definitely injured because I was reading a few things about him. They've got a few injuries as well, like us, and they're definitely not at full strength. Definitely a weaker team to the one we faced on match day 1, and arguably we are a weaker team as well in terms of our squad depth. But us being at home and having that factor behind us, and that they've got to travel, we don't have to travel, which is a big bonus. Everything points to us getting a positive result. And like you said, a draw keeps us in Europe. And I think it's important that we do stay in Europe just for the confidence of the squad. I think they deserve to keep playing European football the way we've performed so far in the Champions League. So, yeah, I'm quite bullish on this game. And the fact that they're coming here probably a little bit crestfallen after that Dortmund game gives us a massive chance.
It's interesting, isn't it? You get to the Champions League, and then when you're there, you worry about the extra games and the the intensity you have to play at and the problems it causes for the squad. But this is what it's all about. Like AC Milan at home, this is what the Champions League, this is what we fought so hard for last season. So I think we need to just give it everything we've got to try and get through. And I think if we do get through after losing the 2 games to Dortmund and when it looked like we were down and out, and then after the injustice of Paris, it's been a real up and down campaign this for us. That PSG game is just one of the best games that I can ever imagine, and just to make that live in the memory the way it should, I think we're going to have to go through, or we're going to have to at least go into the Europa League. Dortmund need to draw to confirm their place at the top, so that they're not going to be playing the kids in their game. And PSG have really not looked all that good from what we've seen of them. What's your sort of overall thoughts on the campaign so far? And when you look back at that first Milan game, which doesn't actually feel that long ago, but also at the same time does feel like a long time ago, how do you think that about that game now? In the context of everything that's happened since then.
I think we've improved a lot since that game, to be honest. I think we played that game a little bit in awe of the occasion more than playing a football game. I think on the pitch, Milan do have good players, but on the pitch, I think we've got a very comparable team, especially at full strength to what they have, if not arguably better. So I think we played that game a little bit, not in fear, but sort of edgy. But since then, I think obviously the PSG game, that's going to be a game that we're all going to remember for a very long time. That was an unbelievable high. And even if we don't get through, I think everyone's going to remember that game when Dan Burns scored against Paris and Cher hit an absolute banger. And it was just an unbelievable game. I've watched the replay of that game, I reckon 30, 40 times already. So I'm sure we'll all remember that game for a long time to come. But yeah, the Champions League campaign's been fantastic. I've obviously enjoyed it, being that we're back at the top level of European football. The one thing that's probably stuck in my craw till now is not even the Paris game, is that Dortmund home game. Because I thought that was, coming off the back of the Paris game, I thought that was a real opportunity for us, even with not a win, but getting a result there would have been massive. And Dortmund were coming into that game under pressure themselves. They only had 1 point after 2 games. So that was a frustrating game. And when you talk about small details, I mean, we hit the crossbar twice that game. We had countless chances. We probably should have got a result on any other day. So it will be frustrating to see us go out if that is the case on Thursday morning. But yeah, I've just got a feeling that we're going to get a very good result against Milan. And I mean, PSG are very, very mentally fragile, and if they can't handle 50,000 Geordies at St James's Park, I'm not sure they're going to be able to handle 75,000 people at Dortmund and 25,000 people in the Yellow Wall, because Dortmund got sort of taken apart by PSG in the first game, and I'm sure they're not wanting to do the double over them. So it is an advantage for us that Paris have an away game on the last match day and we have the home game, and it's not flipped the other way around, because if it was, then probably you'd think, yeah, we're no chance. But it's all still, in my opinion, in our hands. I think if we get an early goal, or if we score first while the PSG game is still level, I think that'll reverberate around St James's Park, and that score might even reverberate in Germany. I think PSG may get word that they're now behind and they need to get that goal, and it'll be an absolute disgrace and a massive travesty for them and their owners if they miss out of the Champions League. And it'll be great karma if they do, because of the way they carried on after the last game, and the words that Mbappe said after that game was a disgrace. And I'd like nothing more to see his sorry little face in the Europa League playing some random Hungarian team. And hope he enjoys that.
It'll be a travesty for your wafer as well. Don't forget if
it would be. Yeah, it would be.
I am not a conspiracy theorist, but that was something dodgy happened there. Like you've got the the PSG owner sitting on the UEFA board, and then they get the 8 minutes and they get that. So yeah, that's why it'd be so nice to just get through for that reason as well.
Yeah.
I think you're right about the Dortmund game, and the thing about the Champions League. This sounds really like a really obvious thing to say, but it's not just the points that you get for a win; it's the points that the other clubs get when they win and you don't win. So, like, it doesn't in the Premier League. If you're not always playing clubs that are around you, but in the Champions League, everyone is around you because it's only 4 teams. So
they're all 6 pointers.
They're all 6 pointers. It's all so consequential. And that's why it's such a great tournament, I think, to be in. It's so, and I do think, we've got it out our system now. These big games, like the novelty won't be there next time. Even if we don't get in next season, we should still be in some kind of Europe. So the fans are going to be traveling around Europe anyway, wherever that may be, hopefully. So we all know we're on the trajectory back to the Champions League eventually. We'll have a higher coefficient, so we won't be in such a hard group. But I think to qualify from this group, given the standard of the group, it would be absolutely amazing achievement. But if we do drop into the Europa League, I only found this out the other day, we have to play a playoff against the teams that finished second, I think, in the Europa League group stages. So we have to play a playoff against the second team, and then after that we go into a round of 16 with the group winners and then the winners of all the playoff games. So at the minute, that could be like Roma, Villarreal, clubs like that. So it's not a given, actually, that we'd get straight into the Europa League. We'll have to do this fucking playoff first, which is 2 extra games. It's effectively 2 rounds of 16. I think that was it. I was looking at it and thinking that sounds very strange, but you know what UEFA are like. They want the big clubs in the competitions, don't they?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's the whole point of the third place Champions League team getting into the Europa League, in case there is one or a couple of big teams who should be in the top, or UEFA want around the top European competitions. They get that extra chance. And yeah, I mean, even if we do have to play a second place Europa League team, I mean, it is what it is. We'll cross that bridge. Knowing our luck, I was just thinking about this the other day. We're gonna qualify. I reckon we'll qualify, and Paris will choke in Germany. But knowing our luck in our cup draws, we're going to draw like a Real Madrid or something in the in the round of 16, yeah, or a Bayern Munich, exactly. And just to top off the cup draw luck, we're not going to get like a Shakhtar Donetsk or a Porto who managed to scrape first. We're going to get one of these big heavy hitters. But yeah, we'll cross that bridge if we do. But it's it is, even if it is Europa League, European football is European football, and I'm sure the thousands of Geordies who will travel will still enjoy their European trips, whether it's to Real Madrid or whether it's to Villarreal.
Absolutely, and it's all experience, isn't it? For the group, for the players, for the management, for the club as a whole, as the club develops back into a regular European club. I know they want Champions League. They've said that they want to do that every season. I think we will get there, but even big clubs who've won leagues don't always stay in the Champions League all the time. So for us, it's mainly a money thing because we want to try and bridge that gap for the FFP reasons. But we're ahead of schedule as it is. So let's see how we do. Like I said, it'd be a phenomenal achievement to qualify. I think we're going to qualify as well. I think we're going to win against Milan quite comfortably. I think we'll have too much for them. And I just think PSG will choke. I think they'll probably get beaten Dortmund. What's your prediction for the game? You were absolutely spot on when we were doing our Champions League qualification pod. I listened back to it. And you said that Newcastle would win the first game against, doesn't matter who it was against. You said they'd win 3-0. We obviously won 4-1. So I'm going to give you that one because that was a great prediction. What's your prediction for this game against AC Milan?
I think we're going to have too much for them as well. I think we're going to get a 3-1 victory, and I've got a feeling that the Frenchies are going to choke in Germany, and it's going to be one of those similar to when, I think, was it Villa scored or someone scored that late goal for us to win the championship, where we won 3-0 on the last day, and I think Villa or someone scored a last minute goal against Brighton. It was Villa. Villa scored, I think,
Jack
against
Grealish.
Brighton. Yeah. And the news filtered through, and we were able to celebrate at full time. I think something like that will happen, where Dortmund and Paris will either be level or it'll be either way, and then it'll be a late goal scored in our favour, and St James's Park will erupt.
And it'll be the exact opposite feeling to this morning, driving to work with minimal sleep after a defeat like that, driving to work when we've won and we're qualified in the Champions League. Only me and you could come onto this podcast about 2 away defeats, cumulatively 7-1, and end up feeling this positive and happy. I appreciate it. Very good. All right, Dimi, thanks very much. We will be back for a review of the Milan game, and then we've got Fulham to look forward to as well. Thanks, Dimi. I'll speak to you soon.
Cheers, mate.
Cheers.